The camera flickers like an old VHS tape, and for a moment you can almost hear the crowd, thousands of voices rising as a small woman with bright eyes and bold colors steps onto the stage. Lisa Left Eye Lopes moves like she's carrying lightning in her pockets. Every gesture is sharp. Every word feels heavier than the beat behind it. And then, in a sudden shift, the picture fades to a dirt road in Honduras, quiet, sun-bleached, nothing glamorous about it. A winding path, a single car, and a life that would end far from the arenas she once lit up. TLC had that rare it factor, the kind that only a few names in American culture ever owned: Michael Jackson, Madonna, Prince, Jordan, Kobe. They weren't the strongest singers, but they became the best-selling American girl group in history. And at the center of all that shine was Left Eye, the firestarter, the visionary, the soul who refused to shrink herself. But what happens when the brightest spark in the room is also the one carrying the heaviest shadows? And what does it cost a woman to keep performing while her past keeps pulling at her from the dark? The story of Lisa Left Eye Lopes begins far from the bright colors and bold stage lights that would one day define her. It begins in Philadelphia, inside a small home where music and chaos lived side by side. Her father, Ronald Lopes, was a U.S. Army staff sergeant who played in the Army band. He kept his trumpet polished, his uniform crisp, and his rules sharper than anything in the house. Her mother, Wanda, carried the softness, but it was often overpowered by the storms that moved through their living room. Lisa showed signs of brilliance long before she knew what to do with it. Family members said she was talking around 1 year old. At 5, she taught herself to play the piano, tiny fingers stretching across keys that seemed too big for her hands. Music wasn't just something she liked. It was the one place where she felt unafraid. But the rest of her world was not gentle. Her father drank heavily, and the arguments between her parents filled the house like smoke. In one of the details she later shared, he gave her beer when she was just a child. She didn't understand what addiction was, or what trauma could do to a family. She just knew the house was loud, and that she needed a way out of the noise. Because her father served in the military, the family moved often. Every new city meant new kids, new streets, new rules. Lisa learned early how to pack light, how to adapt fast, and how to protect the people she loved. She was especially protective of her younger siblings, almost like a second mother, watching over them while trying to understand her own place in the world. When they finally settled in North Philly, the neighborhood was rough. You could hear sirens at night, arguments through thin walls, and the steady hum of people trying to survive. But Lisa believed, deep in her chest, even as a child, that she was meant for something bigger. She used to say she would become a star and take care of her family. It wasn't a dream. It was a promise she repeated to herself whenever life felt too heavy. By the age of 13, the tension at home pushed her to move in with her grandmother on her father's side. Life there wasn't perfect either, but it gave her space to breathe. She still ran away at times, running not to escape responsibility, but to escape the emotional weight she carried for everyone else. Each time, she returned, hoping the house would feel different. It never did. At 17, she made the decision that would change her life forever. Her boyfriend told her about someone in Atlanta looking for a female rapper. It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't even a contract. But it was a direction, and Lisa, hungry for a future that didn't look like her past, took it. She packed what little she had, left Philadelphia, and boarded a bus toward a city she'd never seen. Atlanta in the early 90s was alive, new sounds, new talent, new energy. It was the kind of place where a young artist could walk into a studio and walk out with a dream. Not long after arriving, Lisa met Rico Wade from Organized Noise, a producer who could hear potential the way some people hear rhythm. Through him, she crossed paths with Burke, a young manager, and Crystal Jones, a singer who was forming a girl group. The idea was simple: blend R&B with hip-hop, create a female version of the bold, street-smart style that groups like Belle Biv DeVoe had made popular. The group was first called Second Nature, with Crystal as the singer, Tyan Watkins, later known as T-Boz, as the lead voice, and Lisa as the rapper. Her original stage name wasn't Left Eye yet. She tried out names, styles, flows. What she lacked in resources, she made up for with creativity. But in Atlanta, she faced a new kind of struggle: homelessness. With no stable place to stay, she turned to Jermaine Dupri, then a young producer working with Criss Cross. His mother didn't allow girls in the house, so he hid Lisa in his closet until she had somewhere else to go. Even in the middle of survival mode, she worked. She recorded early tracks, practiced constantly, and studied every artist making noise at the time. She didn't have money, but she had momentum. The turning point came when Pebbles, a successful artist and businesswoman married to L.A. Reid, discovered T-Boz in a hair salon. One meeting led to another, and suddenly Pebbles was taking over management of the group. She changed their name to TLC, using the first initials of Tyan, Lisa, and Crystal. Crystal eventually left, and Rosonda Thomas, soon called Chilli, joined the group. Pebbles reshaped their image, bought their contracts, and prepared them for the national stage. And just when their future finally seemed to open up, tragedy struck. On the very day Lisa signed her contract, her father was killed after an argument with a relative. She walked into the music industry carrying both her biggest opportunity and one of her deepest wounds, all within the same day. It was the beginning of a rise no one could have predicted, and a fall no one could have prevented. By the early 1990s, Atlanta had become a new capital for black music, hip-hop bubbling in studios, R&B singers shaping the next wave of American sound. Into that energy stepped three young women who didn't look or act like anyone else on the radio. TLC wasn't polished. They weren't built on glamour. They were real, loud, messy, confident, and proud to show the world exactly who they were. And at the center of that storm stood Left Eye, the smallest one with the biggest creative spark. When TLC released their debut album, Ooooooooohhh. On the TLC tip, the industry didn't fully know what to do with them. Their style was part tomboy, part comic book energy, part social statement. They wore oversized shirts, bright colors, and baggy jeans from Cross Colors. They danced hard, rapped freely, and didn't soften themselves to fit an R&B mold. T-Boz brought the low, smoky voice. Chilli brought the smooth, polished melodies. And Left Eye, she brought mischief, message, and magic. Her signature accessory, a condom placed on the left lens of her glasses, became an instant icon. In the early 90s, when HIV was still a taboo subject in many black communities, Left Eye made safe sex a part of fashion, something you couldn't ignore, something she insisted was necessary. The more people asked her why she did it, the more she doubled down. For her, music wasn't entertainment alone, it was a way to push conversations forward. The debut album produced hit after hit: Ain't Too Proud to Beg, Baby Baby Baby, What About Your Friends, Hat to the Back. Each song had its own life, its own message, and its own audience. TLC quickly became household names, young women who sounded like the people listening to them, funny, frustrated, bold, and imperfect. More than 4 million albums sold. Tours lined up. TV appearances. Magazine covers. TLC had arrived. But with fame came exposure, and exposure meant people could see everything, including the cracks forming behind the scenes. Their first big tour was with MC Hammer's enormous Too Legit to Quit production. Hammer was generous, professional, and wildly successful at the time. He pulled Left Eye aside and encouraged her to review her contract. "If you're selling out arenas and still broke," he said, "something isn't right." She took his words to heart. It would later become one of the biggest lessons of her life. As TLC grew, they also fought for shape and identity. Their second album, CrazySexyCool, would define them, but before they could get there, life hit with full force. Left Eye's relationship with NFL star Andre Rison was a storm from the beginning. Attraction turned quickly into chaos, jealousy, drinking, arguments, and police reports. Even as the group was preparing world-class music, Left Eye was living through emotional battles that left her tired and wounded. But the world didn't know that yet. All the world saw was the girl with the bright smile and wild energy. No one could imagine the depth of pain she carried. When the group entered the studio with producers like Dallas Austin and Organized Noise, they found a sound that didn't exist anywhere else. Smooth R&B blended with hip-hop drums, soft harmonies floating over deep rhythms. And in the corners of every song, you could feel Left Eye, her pen sharp, her presence unmistakable. Then came Waterfalls. It wasn't her solo song, but Left Eye played a quiet, powerful role behind its creation. Rico Wade and Organized Noise credit her with shaping pieces of the concept, helping the song grow from an idea into a national anthem. And while she only performed one short rap verse, it became one of the most quoted parts of TLC's entire catalog, honest, vulnerable, and socially aware. But even with all this brilliance, conflict lingered. Left Eye refused to compromise her values. When Creep was selected as a single, she spoke out publicly. The song encouraged a woman to creep back on her unfaithful partner, to cheat because he cheated. Left Eye disagreed with the message deeply. She wanted empowerment, not revenge. "Tell her to leave him," she said, "don't tell her to cheat back." She threatened to wear tape over her mouth in the music video, a protest no one in the label could ignore. Despite her resistance, Creep became TLC's first #1 hit. But the real explosion came when CrazySexyCool dropped in 1994. The album didn't just sell, it shifted American culture. Waterfalls sat at #1 for 7 straight weeks. Red Light Special soared. Creep won a Grammy. TLC became the first black act in history to win MTV's Video of the Year. Their music crossed race, age, and geography. They weren't just stars, they were the sound of the mid-90s. Behind the scenes, though, success did not mean security. The three women who had just sold more than 20 million albums were still struggling financially. Their management contracts, production costs, and recoupable expenses swallowed almost every dollar they earned. But in the public eye, they were unstoppable: television roles, film appearances, magazine covers, endorsement requests. And through it all, Left Eye stood out. Not because she tried to, simply because she was different. She didn't mind being messy. She didn't fear being misunderstood. She spoke truth even when it shook the room. Her charisma, her creativity, her wild symbolism, condoms, face paint, spiritual references, made her unforgettable. This was the peak. The moment when the world seemed to open for TLC. But peaks have edges. And the next step, for Left Eye, would lead her into fire, literally. The peak of TLC's success was dazzling: chart-topping singles, Grammy wins, international tours, and a cultural influence so deep that even people who didn't listen to R&B knew their names. But for Lisa Left Eye Lopes, the distance between the stage and her private life was growing wider every day. Success didn't quiet her storms. If anything, it made them harder to hide. The trouble with Andre Rison had been simmering long before the public saw it. The love between them was real, but so were the arguments, the jealousy, and the drinking. Two young stars, both under pressure, both trying to control something in a world that kept spinning too fast. There were police calls, broken nights, and moments where fear replaced affection. Lisa was caught between wanting to stay, wanting to leave, and wanting to save parts of herself she wasn't sure how to protect. On June 8, 1994, everything cracked. After another heated argument, Lisa gathered a pile of Andre's sneakers, symbols of his NFL success, and set them in the bathtub. She lit them. Maybe she thought the fire would stay contained. Maybe she wanted to make a point, not a tragedy. But flames have no patience for human intentions. They spread, climbing walls, filling the house with heat and smoke. By the time firefighters arrived, the mansion was gone. Outside, in the driveway, Lisa picked up a vacuum pipe and smashed the windows of Andre's cars, another gesture of a woman consumed by pain she couldn't name or control. The next day, she turned herself in. She was charged with felony arson, released on bail, and sentenced to 5 years of probation with mandatory treatment at a halfway house. The headlines were merciless. The world turned her into a caricature, a crazy girlfriend, a tabloid story, but very few understood the deeper truth: trauma leaves echoes, and sometimes those echoes erupt. While she was in the halfway house, TLC continued recording CrazySexyCool. Lisa wrote her verses when she could, always trying to balance rehabilitation with creativity. She contributed 2 rap verses and ideas that helped shape Waterfalls, even though she was physically distant from the studio. It was a strange contrast. The album would become one of the most celebrated of the decade, even as its most creative member was battling the hardest chapter of her life. But when success finally hit, diamond certification, sold-out tours, worldwide fame, another problem rose to the surface: money. Or rather, the lack of it. Behind the scenes, TLC's finances were unraveling. Contracts, management fees, production costs, tour expenses, everything added up except the checks in their pockets. Left Eye, who was never afraid to speak truth, broke down the math publicly. After generating tens of millions of dollars, each member received around $50,000. It was a devastating reminder that fame and wealth are not the same thing. Desperate for answers, Lisa gathered a group of friends from the diversion center and marched into L.A. Reid's office demanding explanations. Reid pointed to Clive Davis. So they marched to Clive Davis. In a surreal moment, they walked into his office while he was meeting with Sean Diddy Combs. No one was harmed, but the message was clear: TLC wanted what they earned. After a small payout and no real resolution, their lawyer advised them to do the unthinkable: file for bankruptcy. It was a national shock. On the very night they held Grammys in their hands, TLC told the world they were broke. During this period, Lisa's artistic spirit burned hotter. She didn't want to be a passive member of a machine. She wanted creative control, ownership, purpose. She also became sharper in business, buying domain names for her friends like Lil Kim to protect them from cyber squatters, launching her own production company, signing new girl groups like Blaque and Egypt, and beginning serious work on her solo material. But independence came with friction. When TLC started crafting fan mail, Lisa felt increasingly sidelined. Dallas Austin demanded $4 million to produce the album. The label prioritized radio hits. And Left Eye, always the visionary, felt her ideas were being muted. In interviews, she said she had graduated from the TLC era and couldn't stand behind a project that didn't represent her soul. She called out T-Boz, Chilli, and Austin by name, challenging them to a 3-album competition she called The Challenge. She pushed LaFace to award $1.5 million to the winner. Chilli fired back, calling her behavior selfish and heartless. The group had problems before, but this moment made the cracks public. Fans could now see what had been simmering for years: 3 women who loved each other, but didn't always speak the same artistic language. At the same time, Lisa's inner world was shifting. She fell into a spiritual search that led her to the controversial herbalist Dr. Sebi. She traveled to Honduras for cleansing retreats, trying to quiet the chaos inside her. She claimed a spirit was following her, one that meant harm. And then, during her stay, tragedy struck. The car she was in hit and killed a young boy. His last name was Lopez. Lisa believed the spirit meant to take her, but took him instead. This belief followed her into her final months, a feeling that something unseen was closing in around her. She kept working. She filmed documentaries. She recorded new music. She signed with Death Row under the name NNA. She talked about building an orphanage on land she purchased in Honduras. She was searching for clarity, peace, redemption. But life, like fire, doesn't wait for anyone to finish their healing. Across the United States, TLC wasn't just a successful group, they were the soundtrack to an entire generation. Their songs played in barbershops, school dances, summer cookouts, and on every major radio station from New York to Los Angeles. For many Americans, especially Black families, TLC felt familiar. They were young women who spoke honestly about love, mistakes, insecurities, financial struggles, and survival. Songs like Waterfalls, No Scrubs, and Unpretty didn't just entertain, they taught. They questioned. They comforted. They empowered. But when the house fire made headlines, when the bankruptcy hit national TV, and when the internal conflict spilled into interviews, the public narrative grew complicated. Americans watched Left Eye, bright, talented, unpredictable, become both a cautionary tale and a symbol of resistance. Some saw her as reckless. Others saw a young woman fighting against an industry that often chewed up artists and left them with nothing. Many older fans recognized pieces of their own struggles in hers: childhood trauma, financial traps, toxic love, and a deep desire to rewrite one's own story. Internationally, TLC became ambassadors of 90s American culture. Their music topped charts in Europe, Asia, Australia, and Latin America. Fans abroad didn't always understand the full context of Atlanta, black girlhood, or the American music industry, but they felt the emotion. They connected to the honesty in the lyrics, the chemistry between the three women, and the charisma that made TLC impossible to ignore. For many around the world, Left Eye represented the fearless heart of the group, the member who never dulled her edges to blend in. Media responses were mixed. Some praised her artistic courage, her spiritual searching, her refusal to be silent. Others focused on the chaos, painting her as impulsive or unstable. But with time, a deeper understanding slowly emerged. Fans, journalists, and scholars began to revisit her interviews, her journals, her documentary footage. They saw not a troubled star, but a woman battling unresolved trauma, navigating fame without a safety net, and searching for meaning in a world that demanded too much of her too soon. In both America and abroad, her story has settled into a complex legacy, one that blends triumph with tragedy, brilliance with burden, and a voice that still echoes long after the music stops. In the final footage recorded of Lisa, Left Eye Lopes, the sun hangs low over a quiet Honduran road. She's smiling, calm in a way that feels rare for someone who spent her life running between extremes, fame and fear, spotlight and shadow, creation and destruction. Hours later, that same road would take her life, leaving the world with questions that still ache decades later. What makes her story linger isn't just the tragedy of her final moments. It's the undeniable force of everything she left behind. TLC remains the best-selling American girl group of all time, their music etched into the cultural memory of the 90s. Waterfalls, No Scrubs, and Unpretty continue to speak to new generations, songs that challenge, comfort, and remind listeners of their own worth. And woven into every era of that legacy is Left Eye, the lyricist who took risks, the voice who refused to stay quiet, the artist who dared to question everything. Her brilliance was often misunderstood, but it was never small. She explored business before most artists understood digital ownership. She nurtured new groups like Blaque. She dreamed of building an orphanage in Honduras. She searched for healing not in applause but in truth, even when that truth was painful. In many ways, Lisa was always reaching for something just beyond the world's edge, a place where her creativity and spirit could finally settle. For those who grew up with TLC, her story is a reminder of how fragile genius can be. For younger listeners discovering her now, it's an invitation to look deeper than headlines and see the human being behind the legend. She was bold, brilliant, imperfect, and unforgettable. If this story brings someone to mind, someone who burned bright, battled hard, or left too soon, feel free to speak their name in the comments. Stories survive when we keep telling them. And if you'd like to stay with us as we explore more lives that shaped music, culture, and the world we live in, you're welcome here. There is always more to learn, more to honor, more to remember. Until next time, keep Lisa's light alive.